welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Appreciate you coming out on or connecting in on a Thursday evening. I know talking about roads and ditches is not the most interesting thing in the world, but I appreciate you taking the time to get versed on what we're proposing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a lot of background information as well as information on the ballot initiative itself, and again, for now, feel free to ask questions as we're going. Again, if a lot of people sign on, then I'll just mute everybody and continue on to the end, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. Either way, we'll have time for Q&A afterwards, get comments and so forth. Hope everybody's doing well and staying safe and healthy under our new COVID paradigm. I know it's an interesting time, which is making us meet virtually like this, but speaking of COVID, back in March, the committee, the infrastructure committee, had some serious discussions along with council regarding whether or not we should continue to move forward to develop a proposal for the ballot, given the whole COVID situation. And what we talked about back then was that the one thing that would be really bad is if we just stopped our momentum and stopped moving forward. And then we got 8 months later to November, and things were, in a better shape than they were last spring, and we had wasted all that time and didn't have something for the proposal. Now, it looks like that was actually some good logic. I mean, things are a little better than they were back in March, although obviously we're not anywhere near out of the woods. But ultimately, what we decided is that, we wanted to continue to move forward, and, if things weren't like they were still in March, we'd put something on the ballot and ultimately let the residents decide whether or not A, it was the right time, and B, it was the right proposal. So obviously we do have a proposal on the ballot. So last year, as I'm sure you all remember, we had a comprehensive proposal on the ballot, and obviously it was voted down, or we wouldn't be back in this situation again. But our post-mortem analysis of that proposal, kind of indicated that two of the biggest complaints were that the prior proposal was too extreme. In other words, we were doing too much road work, and it was too costly. So we, and by we I mean the infrastructure committee, kind of went back to the drawing board, and we've been working since the election last November to try to come up with some alternative plan. And we've had, I think, 7 or 8 meetings. We've had a great resident turnout at the meetings, which is something that we had always wanted when we were trying to develop the last plan. And I think one great thing about a contentious ballot proposal like we had last year is it does shine a spotlight on the issue, and so people really became engaged and wanted to be part of the process. So we did have a lot of residents attend our meetings. And we had great suggestions from the residents. In fact, most of the meetings, I conducted them just like the residents were part of the committee. So it was just a free and open discussion. We had lots of great suggestions and ideas from the residents. And in fact, a lot of those were incorporated into 3 plans that we came up with. So we came up with 3 distinctly different potential road proposals. And then once we came up with those plans, what we did is we had town halls. So back in the late April, early May timeframe, we had 3 virtual town halls, and the idea there was to get input on those 3 different proposals to help the committee decide and determine which one would probably be the best fit for Lathrup Village. And so we did decide on one of those plans. We narrowed it down from 3 to 1. We presented it to City Council. They agreed that the proposal should move forward, and it got put on the ballot. And so that's what we'll talk about tonight here in a few minutes. One thing I do want to mention, we did pay a lot of attention to the things that were said, and again, we, the committee, paid attention to a lot of the things that were said during the last election. So there were a lot of perceptions that were out there, some of them accurate, some of them weren't accurate. But either way, I thought it was very important for the committee to be constantly reminded of what those things were, because as we deliberated, I wanted to make sure that we tried to address some of those resident concerns to the extent that we could. And those were things, none of these will be surprises, because I'm sure you heard all these things Last year, things like the cost was too high. It wasn't fair to new residents. The process was rushed. There wasn't enough time for input. The payback period was too long. We were doing too much road. Some areas wanted their dirt roads to stay dirt road. The costs needed to be more split more evenly between residents, and things like the city should already have the money to be able to fix the roads from our taxes and so on. So I reminded people of those, or the committee members of those, some of those perceptions, because again, I wanted them to keep them in mind as we deliberated, and I think we did a really good job in terms of paying attention to those issues and those concerns where we had the ability to do so, and coming up with this new proposal. And I think you'll see that as we talk through some of the details. I do want to thank, while we're talking about the committee, thank the committee members. They gave up a lot of nights and did a lot of hard work to help us develop this plan. The committee members are Hugo Cardenas, Joe Robinson, Michael Griffin, and Mike Keenan, and I think Mike Keenan is on the call. I don't see any of the others, but so we do have one of the committee members on the call if you do have questions as we get going through the proposal. I also want to thank our advisors. We had several advisors who met with us regularly. Cheryl Mitchell, who's on the call, she's our city administrator. Scott Ringler, he's also on the call. He's our city engineer. Salim Siddiqui, who is one of the other city council members. Scott Baker, who's our city attorney, and then the Budzinski Group was our bond consultants, who helped us with the financing. So they were all very instrumental in getting this proposal off the ground. So the first thing I want to do is we start to move into the ballot proposal. I want to talk about, why do we need this? Why do we need a road proposal? And I think the answer to that question is pretty obvious. If you spend any time driving around Lathrup or walking around Lathrup, you can see that the roads are in pretty bad shape. There's a lot of cracks, there's potholes. We get regular reports of the city of car damage. They're unsightly. The fact that they're not smooth, drives safety issues. And then the other reason behind it as well is that the rate of degeneration of our roads is accelerating. So our roads are getting worse, and they're getting worse at a faster rate. And the reason that that's the case is because we as a city can only, traditionally afford to fix about 0.4 miles of road per year. And in fact, this year, you may have noticed we didn't have a road program this year because we couldn't afford to do any road this year. So if you look at that traditional rate of about 0.4 miles a summer, at that rate with 26.5 miles of local residential roadway, it's going to take us 63 years to get to all the roads in the city. And obviously that's not a tenable solution. So we had to come up with something to address the issue. And then also, related to this is our ditch situation. And, as our ditches don't work very well either. We get a moderate rain or, especially on a heavy rain, a lot of the ditches in the city will fill up, they'll overflow, they overflow onto people's driveways and their lawns, onto the sidewalks. And, a lot of times for a lot of these ditches, it'll take a couple days to a couple of weeks for those ditches to drain out and dry. And so what ends up happening is people's sidewalks get damaged, their driveway approaches get damaged. There's a fresh water source for animals and insects, and that's one of the main reasons why we've had such an explosion of rodents in the last decade. And most importantly, the other thing that happens is when that water sits in the ditches, what it does is it seeps under the ground, underneath the road, and it attacks the road from below. So not only is our road degrading from above, but it's also degrading from below. And so what ends up happening is because of our low-quality ditches, the roads, we don't get the full life out of a piece of road. They deteriorate quicker than they should. And so, so that's why we need to do something, because our roads and ditches are in bad shape. And then the other thing I want to address and get asked a lot about is, well, how did we get into this situation? How did the roads, get to the point where they're in such bad shape? And last year, if you came to any of the town halls or any of the presentations, watched them online, at this point in the presentation, I did about a 25-minute, sometimes even about a half an hour, presentation about how we got here. I'm not going to do that again. I think a lot of people have seen that. And so what I'm going to do is just do a real quick overview of how we got here. So for those of you who've seen it before, it'll be a quick refresher. And if you haven't seen it, it'll be a brief intro for you. But if you do want to see the full blown out discussion in terms of how we got into this situation, you can go to fixlvroads.com. So that's FIXLV for Lathrup Village, roads.com. So fixlvroads.com. That's a website that we created that has all the information I'm going to talk about tonight, plus a whole lot more about the proposal. And so you can get a lot of information there. And there is a link on that site to the full-blown discussion on how we got here. But like I said, I'm just going to do a quick 5-minute overview, and then we'll get into the details of the proposal. So why is it that we can't maintain our roads, like we used to do 25, 30 years ago in the city? And the answer to that question is pretty obvious. It's an issue of money. We just don't have it. And this is not something that's unique to the city of Lathrup. This is something that all municipalities across the state are struggling with. We just don't have the money that we used to have. And it's not an issue of, mismanaging the funds that we get. In fact, our city administrator and our treasurer squeeze every cent out of every dollar that gets sent up to the city, and they really make our money go a long way. They're very, very efficient, but it's really more on the revenue side. The revenue that we used to have, we just don't have that anymore. And the reason why the revenue is so much smaller than it was in years past has to do with essentially four things. You've got Proposition A, Headley, the reductions in state shared revenue, and then the 2008 real estate crash. So real quickly, I just want to talk about how each of those four things have reduced the amount of money that we have to put into the roads so that we haven't been able to maintain them, and we've ended up with the situation that we're in. So again, real quickly, Proposition A, you're probably familiar with it or heard of it. Basically, what it is, it's a state tax law that limits the value limits the growth of your taxable value of your home. So while the actual value of your house may be going up very steeply, the taxable value, the value that you're taxed on, goes up very, very slowly, and that's due to Proposal A. And so back in 2007, the city was at the highest aggregate taxable value that we had. We were worth the most as a city than we had ever been in our history. And then in 2008, as you know, there was a real estate crash, and property values did not start to go back up until about 2014. So from 2007 to 2014, the city lost $75 million in aggregate taxable value. So think about that for a second. That's a huge number for a city our size. And what that meant is what that translated to is that we lost 40 to 50% of our revenue during those years. So think about trying to operate your household with half the revenue that you have now, half the income. Obviously, something would have to give, and you'd have to cut back on discretionary expenditures, and that's what cities like Lathrup Village have had to do. We've had to cut back on expenditures and discretionary expenditures, and the one that gets hit the most, because it's also one of the most expensive, is roads. So we just lost the ability to maintain our roads, mostly from the combination of Proposal A and the 2008 crash. And if you remember what I just said, Proposal A makes sure that your taxable value grows very, very slowly. So when your taxable value plummeted, it's now going to take a very long time for it to get back to where we were in 2007. So even if the economy booms from here on out to eternity, it's going to take until the early 2030s before we get back to the revenue level that we were in 2007. So this is a problem that's not going to go away. We're going to be living with this unless there are tax law changes, for at least another decade. So that's a major issue in terms of why we don't have the money to do these kinds of things. The Headley Amendment is another area, and basically what that does is it says that in any year when the aggregate taxable value goes up as a city, we have to lower the millage rate that we assess our residents so that we get no more revenue than we got in the prior year. And what really sucks about that is that any year where we have to lower the millage rate because property values are going up, we can never raise the millage rate back up. It can only go down. And so what happened is back in 2010, the voters of Lathrup Village set our millage rate at 20 mils. And starting in 2014, property values went up, and they kept going up until the present day, so the millage rate correspondingly dropped. And so now, instead of being at 20 mils, our millage rate this year is about 18 mils. And so essentially what's happened is we've lost 10% of the revenue that we used to have solely because of the Headley rollbacks in our millage rate. And so the only way for us to get more money, more revenue as a city is to build new buildings. And obviously in a city like Lathrup where we're totally built out and have no open land, that's not going to happen. So our revenue will stay flat because of Headley. And if you look back, I always find this statistic kind of interesting. If you look back to 2003, so since 2003, the average Lathrup Village homeowner has been undertaxed due to the Headley Amendment by about $3,000. And so if you multiply that times the 1,700 homes that we have in Lathrup, that's the $5 million that we're asking the voters for this project. So Headley alone, cut the revenue that we needed to maintain the roads, for this particular project. And then lastly, state shared revenue. So basically what's happened over the last couple decades is that the state of Michigan has been balancing its budget on the backs of the municipalities by not giving them, not sharing the revenue that they're legally supposed to be sharing with the municipalities. And there's all sorts of lawsuits that have been going on for a long time about that. But the long and the short of it is that since 2001, Lathrup has received $2.5 million less than they should have. And again, that's another hit. That's $2.5 million we could have been putting towards the roads. And in fact, Michigan is the worst state in the country. It ranks dead last in terms of how much money the state shares with its municipalities. So that's another issue. So all four of these things together just really yields the issue that Lathrup simply does not have the money that it had 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. The discretionary funds that we used to use for the roads have all but dried up. And so again, I talk about about this with residents, and one thing I do hear a lot is, yeah, okay, that all makes sense, but we pay such high taxes, and we do have a very high tax rate here. But the one thing you've got to remember is that when you send your check to the city, half of that money immediately goes away to the schools. And of that remaining half of that goes to public safety services, so police and fire. So after all that's done, we've got a quarter of your check left, and that's got to fund all the things that we do to operate the city. And once that's all done, we're left with about a little less than 2% of your check to put towards things like the roads. So if, for example, your annual taxes are $4,000, only $80 of that goes towards the roads, and that pays for next to nothing. So that's a little bit of a background in terms of how we got into the situation that we're in. So let me pause here before I dive into the ballot initiative and then some of the things surrounding the ballot initiative, just to see if there's any questions on anything that we talked about so far. I can see if some of you are still muted, so make sure if you do have a question that you unmute yourself before you start talking. So any questions at all?
Yeah, I have a question, Bruce.
Okay, who is this?
Ian Zitron.
Oh, hi, Ian. How you doing?
I'm fine. It looks like this isn't giving me the option of using my camera. So.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a bit surprised to hear that when you did your post-mortem, that the only two things that you came up with was it was too extreme and too costly, because while you mentioned it later on, uh, there's this whole issue of if you've been here less than 5 years, the property taxes have doubled, and those of us, and therefore, in the last bond proposal, it would have raised my taxes significantly more than people who had been here 30 years.
Right.
And and you did mention that, um, but I'm still very leery about this, and I wonder if you've taken this into account in the new bond proposal.
Yeah, we have. So so the really frustrating thing, and you probably heard me talking about this, and there was a lot of discussion in the online about this. I know I've seen you comment on things online before, so I know you probably saw some of that. Um, the really frustrating thing for us is that in terms of the roads, the financing mechanisms that we have available, um, unfortunately, because of the way that our state tax laws are structured, essentially penalize people who are newer to any community, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that. I mean, and that's why you see, pretty much across the state, most road projects are done via millage, because there really isn't a great funding mechanism outside of that. We did look at ways, we tried to look at ways last time about to kind of see if we could address that, but everything we tried was either illegal or didn't work for a variety of reasons. So in this particular proposal, I'm going to talk about roads and ditches, and we still, with the road portion of this, again, we're still really limited to just funding this for the most part with the millage. So the millage is much lower than it was last time, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do with the ditches. And in the ditches, in the ditch portion, we were able to make it more equitable. So there was a lot of talk about how to make things more equitable. So I'm not paying 3 times as much as the neighbor who lives right next door. And we were able to do that on the ditches, and that's something I'll talk about in a little bit. And when I get into it, if you have questions, obviously we can talk more about it at that point.
Okay, which brings up another question,
Okay.
but because I took notes as you were speaking. What about? I mean, I take your point about the damaging effects of the ditches. Um, so how about just fixing the ditches in the first instance,
Well,
and
we talked about that on the committee.
leaving the roads as they are right now, until, let us hope, the revenue sharing amount increases. I mean, I understand all the reasons why we're in the position we are, but the only thing I think that might change is if Michigan's revenue sharing were to revert back to a more reasonable level.
Yeah, well, not just the revenue sharing, the tax laws need to be updated as well. Revenue sharing alone wouldn't get us there. It would help, but you're right. I just completely lost my train of thought.
I asked about ditches. Ditches.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. Sorry. Yeah. When people ask questions, my mind goes in a million different ways. But yeah, we as we'll talk about in a minute, we probably spent more time talking about ditches than we did about the roads, because there's not really a simple one size fits all solution for the ditches. And we talked pretty seriously. In fact, the first couple meetings that we had after the election, we kind of just were thinking about taking the attitude of, okay, let's forget about the roads. Let's just do the ditches. We'll do a standalone ditch project. and then, you know, exactly what you were saying, Ian. And the problem with that is a standalone ditch project. So last year, don't hold me to this, these numbers are pretty close, but I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head without looking them up. But last year, the ditch portion of the overall project, I think, was about $4 million. And it was a $21.3 million project last year. So it was about $4 million. If we do the ditches as a standalone project, the cost of it balloons up to over $6 million. And the reason is because there's a lot of, and we're going to talk about this in a minute when we get to the ditches, there's a lot of overlap between a road project and a ditch project. And so we're able to get a tremendous amount of savings by doing those projects together. And when you do it alone, you lose those savings. And so the cost of doing that just became kind of prohibitive. It was too expensive. We looked at a lot of different ways, and just the millage rate to it. I can't remember the exact number. I think the millage rate just to do the ditches over 10 years was something like 6 mils or something. So it was like 3/4 of what we were asking to do it over 10 years instead of 20 years. So it was about 3/4 of what we were asking, you know, in the proposal last year. So so it really makes sense to do them together. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, it was definitely a good thought. It was something we thought of. We just couldn't make it work, unfortunately.
All right, and I mean, I don't want to dominate this, but the the third question I have is, did you ever consider, and I understand that you couldn't do this as a millage, did you ever consider basing each building's share upon frontage?
Yeah, we did, and there was we considered that last year, and there were let me I don't want to. I'm going to make a note here, and at the end I'm going to grab. I have there was a whole list of reasons why we didn't do that.
Okay. I can wait.
But let me.
It's okay. Let other people ask questions. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, and I'll when we get to the end, I'll stay on, and I can grab my notes, and I can get those reasons. There were, I'm just blanking on off the top of my head. Why didn't we do that? Well, I'll get to it. I'll get to it when we get to the end.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to put this on my monitor so I don't forget.
Hey, Bruce, Mike. You know.
Hey, Mike.
From what I recall, one of the reasons that basically frontage, right? Then you have the corner lots that get hammered.
You're cracking up. Your voice was breaking up, Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry. Got a new headset here, so I don't know if it's working right. Yeah, I said one of the reasons that we were looking at, or we didn't go with the road frontage method, right? Is like as an example, people that live in a corner get really dinged pretty heavily. There's a lot of corner houses, and then there's a significant amount of lots that are either double or triple lots too. But that we did look at that. I think that was one of the reasons we didn't do it just solely on frontage, because mainly because of people in the corner.
Yeah, Mike, you gave me enough of a time to find my notes.
Okay. All right.
So you're right. So one of the reasons is well, the main reason behind it was you lose the business subsidy. So if you do it on a frontage basis, where everybody's paying for their frontage, the businesses aren't paying for it, because you can't assess the businesses when they don't live on those roads. All the businesses are on the main roads, but with a millage, the businesses are assessed just like us, and in fact, they pay a much larger share, because their properties tend to be more valuable. So the cost goes up because you don't have the business subsidy. You have the corner issue, and when we analyzed it, generally the bigger houses have more frontage for the most part. There's a direct relationship there, and so when we looked at that as an option, the results were very similar to when we do it as a millage. The costs per home were very similar. But the big issue there is that you lose the business subsidy.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? I know before we jump into the actual proposal itself. Okay, then let's get into the actual proposal. So as I started to say in answering one of Ian's questions, while the ballot initiative that we're going to talk about, it only addresses the roads. The ditches are also going to be addressed via this proposal, but via other processes, and we'll talk about that. So I'm going to talk about the roads first, and then finish with the ditches. So as I mentioned, kind of in the introduction, we did come up with three pretty different proposals that we narrowed down to the one that we're going to talk about right now. And basically what that proposal will do is repave about 7.1 miles of residential road. So we've got 26 and a half miles of local residential roadway, and so that's about 27% of the city's local roads. So we'll do 7.1 miles. It'll be done, again, if it's approved, via a 3-year project, starting in the spring of 2021, so it'll basically next spring, that will cost about $5.85 million and would be paid back over a 10-year period by residents and businesses. And so first thing I want to mention about this is you can see just from the numbers, this is one area where we kind of were able to kind of listen to the concerns of the residents from last November and make some changes. So you can see that this proposal is much lower cost. Last year it was $21.3 million. This year it's $5.8 million. So much lower in cost. Last year we were looking at doing all 26 and a half miles of road. This year we're looking at doing just 7.1 miles of the kind of the worst roads in the village. So it's much lower in cost as well as lower in scope than what it was last year. In terms of what it will cost, so this will be an additional 3.9176 mils, so essentially 3.9 mils, assessed additionally to based on the home's taxable value. And I want to be really explicit here because there was a lot of confusion over this last year. This is based on your taxable value, not your home's actual value. So, for example, I think I could probably sell my house for about $200,000. That's the actual value, but thanks to Proposition A, which we talked about 10 minutes ago, my taxable value is only about $65,000. So it's at $65,000 that this additional 3.9 mils would be assessed against. The additional millage would be again assessed for 10 years. And to the average homeowner, so the average homeowner in Lathrup, and you can kind of adjust your home relative to the numbers that I'm giving you here, but the average home in Lathrup Village has a taxable value of $67,000, and so for the average homeowner, that would equate to $262 per year, again for 10 years. Or if you want to think about it in terms of $100,000 in taxable value, then it would be $392 per year. Now, one of the things that we've done, I talked a little bit earlier about fixlvroads.com. If you go out to fixlvroads.com, there is a cost calculator like we had last year. So if you click on the View My Costs button, it'll take you into a map of the city, and you can click on your home. So you can basically find your home, click on it, and it'll show you what your current taxable value is, and then it'll also show you what this proposal will cost you per year for the 10-year time frame. The specific streets that get done will be chosen from a pool of asphalt streets that require certain types of repairs, so namely full reconstruction or rehabilitation, and I'll define those here on the next slide. So really the way we came up with the 7.1 miles and then the associated $5.8 million of cost was by looking at the various road categories that we had. And you can see here, we've got 3.9 miles of road that require full 1A, what we call 1A reconstruction. And these are the worst roads. So basically, we have to remove the 5 inches of asphalt, and then the substrate, the material below the asphalt, is also in disrepair, and we have to dig down 10 inches and get rid of all of that, and then replace all 15 inches. That's the most intensive, most costly, method of repairing the roads. And we've got 3.9 miles of asphalt road that fall into that category. So what we said is, all right, well, let's look at doing about 2/3 of that. We'll do 2.6 miles of 1A reconstruction. And then 1B reconstruction, that's still full reconstruction, but it's where the material underneath the asphalt is in good shape and doesn't need to be replaced. So we basically strip off the top 5 inches, regrade that existing material, and then put 5 new inches of asphalt. So it's a significantly cheaper than 1A reconstruction. Although the good news is we only have 1 mile that falls into that category, and so what we proposed was doing about 0.6 miles, roughly about 60% of our roads that are in the 1B reconstruction state. The most mileage that we have falls into the rehab category, and in that instance, what we really need to do to get the road back up to new light condition is to just take off the top 3 inches of asphalt and put a new 3 inches on there. So again, we've got roughly 4.5 miles in that category. So we said, let's do about 75% of that. We'll do about 3.7 miles. And then lastly, the gravel roads. Last year the proposal was doing all 1.7 miles of the gravel road. We got some pushback on that, and we basically dramatically reduced that down to 0.2 miles. Most likely we would do a main ingress road, but a very small portion of this will be gravel. So if you add this all up, you get 11 total eligible miles, and of that 11, we're proposing, as we said, that we'll do about 7.1 miles. So again, we're not doing all the roads that need reconstruction or rehabilitation. We're just doing a portion that we felt that the city could afford, which is the 5.85 million, 7.1 miles. Okay, and there could be some slight shifting between once we get into the actual construction. There could be some slight shifting between these categories. Like we might end up doing 2.7 miles of reconstruction and 0.5 miles of 1B reconstruction. But this is how we came up with our estimate. This next slide, and this slide is available on fixlvroads.com. But basically, what it does is it shows those 11 eligible miles. So the roads here that are in colors, the orange, the blue, and the green. These are the 11 miles of roads that are eligible to be considered for that 7.1 that gets repaired. The gray roads are ones that are not eligible to be touched. And so you can see, look on here and see not only is your road eligible, but then what category is it eligible under? Is it 1A or 1B full reconstruction, or is it 1C rehabilitation, which is the green? So again, you can go out to fixlvroads.com. And take as much time as you want to kind of look at that. I'm just wanted to show it to you real briefly. Okay. The specific roads that actually do get repaired, the way that process is going to work is that the infrastructure committee will look at the eligible roads, look at their condition, how it makes most sense, cost effective to structure the various construction seasons, and pick the roads for each construction season. So in the fall, prior to the subsequent construction season, we'll pick those roads. We'll make a recommendation to City Council, and then City Council will have the final approval on the roads that get done for each of the three construction seasons that are proposed under this proposal. I also want to mention, because I know this question always comes up, the $5.85 million does include a 15% contingency, so for costs that are unexpected, issues that we may run into during the construction. It also includes $120,000 for inflation over the 3 years, and then all of the financing costs. And so we're very, or we believe that the $5.85 million estimate is a very accurate estimate. And then on top of that, what also helps us with the accuracy of the estimate is we did a project last year, a core sampling project where we took roadway cores on all the streets so that we know what's underneath the, basically allows us to see underneath the road so that we know exactly what needs to be done to each road. So without that, it would have been a much more of a guess. But because we have that information, we feel that this estimate is going to be very accurate. So to summarize the road piece, again, it's 7.1 miles over 3 years, starting next spring, at a cost of about $5.85 million, which equates to 3.9 mils additionally assessed to all of our residents' taxable value, the taxable value of their home. And for the average, as I said, for the average homeowner with a $67,000 taxable value, it equates to about $262 per year for 10 years. So that's the road piece. Let me stop here and see if there are any questions about the roads before we address the ditches. Susan, looks like you've got your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. My question is, I noticed on this map that you've got some roads identified, for instance, as 1A that are currently unpaved. And I'm curious as to, or even for that matter, 1A and 1B. But I'm curious as to, are you proposing that all unpaved roads are also going to be paved, and have the residents on those roads agreed with that? And what's that circumstance?
No, so what we did, if you saw back here, the unpaved roads technically fall into either 1A or 1B as their category in terms of estimating their cost. But what we've said is that we've got 1.7 miles of gravel road in the city, and when we put together the estimate, we are only proposing doing about 0.2 miles of road. And while we haven't chosen a specific road, essentially the way this went in the committee is last year we proposed doing all the gravel roads. We got some pushback mainly from the I hate using this term, but mainly from the people in the estates section of Lathrup. I think it's the Rackham area. And so, we decided that, on this proposal that, we shouldn't propose doing all the gravel roads. And in fact, we pushed way back, or pushed back. We cut way back, and we said, all right, well, the complaints that we get mostly are for the gravel roads that serve kind of as the ingress into and egress from the city, that pretty much I don't want to say everybody, but that are well traveled, not buried deep in the subdivision, basically main entranceways. And so what we had talked about in the committee is possibly doing one of those roads. So that's kind of where we got the 0.2 miles, because the ingress roads, are all under about 0.2 miles. So we really, again, kind of listened to what people were saying, and we cut way back on the gravel roads, just to a very small amount.
Okay, I have another question. Then you've got a total of 11 miles that you feel are eligible for this, for reconstruction, but we're only
Yep.
doing 7.1. So what happens to the other 4 miles? I mean, when does that address, and what's the plan on that? Have you addressed that at all?
Well, I mean, the plan for that would be, once we finish this project after 3 years, then, as we do our summer, our annual summer paving project, some of those roads will get addressed. We'll just have, instead of having 11 miles that need to be addressed at a slow rate, it'll be, we'll only have 4 miles that'll be left to be addressed. But by the same token, over that time period, we're going to have some of those other 19, or what is it, 11, what did I say, 26? Some of the other 15 miles of road are also going to go bad and fall into some of these categories. That's why last time, the committee and council felt it was, the best thing for the city was to do a comprehensive citywide road project and then go into maintenance mode after that. But the voters voted it down. Now we did, I don't know if you were on from the beginning of the call, we did have another, we came up with 3 proposals and then narrowed it down to 1 proposal within the committee based on some of the town hall input and based upon the opinions of the people on the committee. One of those proposals was going to do all of the, not just the 11 miles, but I think it was going to do 14 miles of roadway over a 5-year project. It would have been the same millage rate, but essentially the same millage rate. I think it was like 3.95 mils instead of 3.91 mils, but it would have been over 20 years. And personally, that was my preference, but the committee voted that down. They felt that felt a little gun shy because there were so many people that were saying last year that 19 years was too long, and so if we dropped it down to 10 years, then we needed to scale it back to keep it at roughly about 3.9 mils, which is roughly what we felt would have the best chance of passing. So you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, this is a problem. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing problem for us. If this gets approved, and we do, over these three years, we do these 7.1 miles, and it goes well, and people see the success of it, there's nothing to stop us from coming back and proposing another proposal to do the remaining 4, or if it balloons up to 5 or 6 by that point, we can do another proposal. But it's going to have to be done piecemeal. We tried to do it, as a comprehensive citywide project, but it was voted down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, the problem is there's just, given the funding structure, the tax structure that we have, and the 4 things I talked about up front, it's just a huge problem, and it's not going to go away unless something major changes across the state. So we just have to do what we can do, what people are comfortable with. Any other questions about the roads, Lillian? It looks like you have your hand up, but your mic, the mic is muted on your end, so you'll need to unmute yourself before you ask your question. You're still muted, Lillian. All right, I'll let you try to figure out how to get your mic unmuted, and while you're doing that, it looks like Susan has another question. So what do you got, Susan?
No, you took care of me. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it looked like your hand was still up on the
Oh,
interface.
sorry. There you go.
All right, and now it looks like Lillian dropped off, so maybe she's going to try to reconnect. So we'll see. Any other questions? Okay, then let's jump into the ditch repair portion. So as I said, the millage rate that we just talked about and the ballot proposal that we just talked about only relates to the roads, but we still need to do something about the ditches. So as I said a little bit earlier, the ditch repair portion is a much more complex issue, and there really isn't a good one-size-fits-all approach, unfortunately. We spent a ton of time talking about ditches, and it was very frustrating trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. I mentioned earlier we talked about doing a citywide standalone ditch proposal, which we were all gung-ho about, and said, all right, well, maybe that's the right answer. Start with the ditches. But then when we looked at the cost of it, as I mentioned earlier, it ballooned because we lost all of the synergies with the road project. So it went up by, from $4 million to $6 million and just became untenable. So our goal was really to try to get as much ditch repair done as possible. And as I talked about before, without ditch repair, we lose about, roughly about 10% of the life of the road because, the road gets attacked from below and gets damaged that way as well as from the elements and the traffic above. So, if we put new roads on streets that had bad ditches, I mean, essentially, if we're wasting 10% of the tax dollars, this project we'd be wasting over $500,000. And so we had a lot of discussion about this, and this is one area where, in addition to the committee members, the residents had a lot of contributed highly to the discussion and had a lot of ideas and comments associated with the ditches. And two of the main takeaways from what the residents at our meeting said, and obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but something that the committee members agreed with too, was that there were really two things that we needed to include in any ditch program. And one was that it made no sense to not do the ditches associated with the 7.1 miles of roads that are repaired. So, the sentiment was the ditches that need to be repaired are the ditches that are done with associated with the 7.1 miles of road. So that way we're using taxpayer dollars as effectively as possible, and our roads will live the fully expected life that they're expected to live, as opposed to losing a couple of years because of bad ditches. So that was one thing we kind of took to heart. The other thing that we took to heart was the residents were pretty adamant that we really shouldn't be separating the ditch project from the road project, because there's so much overlap and so much savings available to the residents, and we should reap those savings for the residents. And the example, that I traditionally give to illustrate, the savings, one of the most expensive portions, actually the most expensive portion of doing a ditching program, a standalone ditching program, is replacing the driveway culverts. And as a reminder, the culverts are those tubes that go underneath the driveways that allow the water to get from one side of the driveway to the other. And the reason why that is so expensive is because in order to replace that tube, if it's not working, we have to break out the pavement on the driveway approach, or part of it anyways, dig out that tube, put the new tube in, and then repave the driveway approach. Well, when we do the roads, we also have to do that same work, essentially, in a lot of situations, because when we build the new road, the driveway approach doesn't necessarily match up exactly to the new road. So in those situations where there's a variance, what we have to do is we have to break out the driveway approach and repave it so that it matches the road. So that's a very expensive process. And the sentiment was, well, why do that twice when, in most instances you only have to do it once if you do those projects together. So that was another thing that we took to heart, is not doing the ditches as a separate project, because there's a lot of savings associated with that. And it's not just the driveway the driveway approach replacement as well. There's also landscaping costs that we would have to do twice if we did two separate projects versus only doing it once, and so on. So it really made sense to do those together. And so the ditch repair that we're talking about is the exact same that we were talking about last year. So it's grading the ditch system on each street so that there's proper flow of water from one end of the street to the other, so that the water flows unobstructed as efficiently as possible. Replacing the non-functional driveway culverts, so those culverts that aren't effectively transporting water from one side of the driveway to the other, replacing those, and then the ones that are functional will get a serious cleaning through a jet cleaning process that will essentially clean them out, make them like new, so that water is flowing as it should be. And then in those instances where residents have extended culverts, so for a variety of reasons, some residents have culverts that extend past their driveway. Those extensions would also be jetted out and cleaned as well to get the system working as it should. So, so as I said before, the millage rate that we talked about earlier only covers the roads. So the ditch repair, based on what we proposed, the ditch repair cost will be an extra cost, and it's only going to be for the residents who live on those 7.1 miles of streets that are repaired. And the actual cost of a given street's ditch repair will be evenly split between the residents on that street and repaid over 10 years via special assessment. So it's an additional cost only for those people who live on those 7.1 miles of road. And then we're going to look at the actual cost of repairing that street's ditches and divide it over the number of homes that are on that ditch, so that everybody's paying this on that street, so that everybody's paying the same thing, and people will have 10 years to pay it back via a special assessment. So, Ian, to get to your question that you asked more towards the beginning of the presentation, this was one area where we could address the kind of the equity issue. So this approach really addresses the equity issue in two ways. First of all, everybody on the street is paying the same amount. So the cost, everybody's benefiting equally from the ditch repair. So they're splitting the costs evenly. So it's not like I'm paying 3 times as much as the neighbor who lives right next door to me. Everybody pays the same. So on the ditch piece, we were able to address equity here in one way, and then the second way that we're addressing equity is that each street is only paying for their own ditch system. So we got attacked basically last year by a lot of people who came to the town halls or contacted us individually and said, wait a minute, this isn't fair. Our street has done an excellent job of maintaining our ditches. People go out there, they remove the debris, they keep the roots out of there, and so on. So why are we paying for another street whose ditch is in deplorable shape and is going to require a ton of money to get back functioning properly? And so this also addresses that because you're only paying for your own street's ditches. And so in terms of oh, sorry, I have a slide. I should have put this up. So in terms of the estimates of cost, essentially streets with more homes will generally have lower cost estimates than similar sized streets with fewer homes. Because if you've got more homes on the same size street, you've got more homes to split the cost with. So some of the bigger homes, again, lack of a better term, for example, that estate section, they've got bigger lots, so there's going to be fewer homes to split the cost. So that's an example of an area where you might have slightly higher estimates because there are fewer homes. Also, because we're paying for the actual cost to repair our own ditch systems, streets with non-functional ditch systems are generally going to have higher costs than those that have functional ditch systems. And so, some areas, are probably not going to get hit with much cost at all. So, for example, my street, and I'll be very clear, my street is not one of the ones that is eligible for any kind of work under this proposal, but it's a good example with respect to ditches. So, on my street, all the water flows in one direction towards the end of the street, and the house on that end of the street has a big root system that completely blocks the ditch. So every time it rains, that entire side of the street backs up because the water has nowhere to go. So in an example like that, you know, my street's ditch system actually works very well. It's just that root needs to be removed, and that wouldn't be a very costly thing. So if we were one of the streets that had our ditches done, our costs would not be, you know, all that great. So there will be, you know, some streets will have high costs, some streets will have low costs. And so when we worked through the estimates, you know, based on, you know, the number of homes on various streets, essentially for 83% of the homeowners, the average cost will be about $223 per year. And then the other 17%, these are essentially kind of problem areas in that, you know, so that we have several areas within the city where there are no homes or just a small number of homes, 1, 2, 3 homes on you know, somewhat lengthy streets in some instances. And so when we did the math for some of those areas, essentially 17% of the areas, they were prohibitively high costs. You know, we had instances where you know, a resident would have been assessed, you know, over $4,000 a year for 10 years. And so what we're going to do in those areas, there are some creative things that we can do. So in some areas, it makes sense to combine some of those homes with other streets because the ditch system is contiguous. So it logically makes sense and legally makes sense. So we'll be able to combine some of those areas into other special assessment districts. But even so, we'll get that 17% down lower. But there are still going to be some street segments where the cost is going to be prohibitive. And so when we proposed this, or when we talked about it in the committee and proposed it to City Council, what we said in the proposal was that any street or street segment that where the ditch repairs would end up costing more than $400 per year, that street will not be required to have their ditches done. So so that's something to mention as well. So to summarize, and I do have some other points that I want to make about the ditches, but just to summarize what I've talked about so far, again, the ditches are going to be covered. Not by the millage. The millage is only for the roads. The only people who will get hit with costs for ditches are those people that live on the 7.1 miles of roads that ultimately get chosen for repair. It's an extra cost, and that cost will be for the actual work done to get that street's ditches repaired, and that cost will be assessed over 10 years via special assessment. Everybody on the street will pay the same thing. All right, so let me just make a few more points about the ditches, and then I'll open it up for questions because I know we'll have a lot. So as I said, it'll be done via special assessment, and if we have a street that is designated for road repair and they successfully move to block the special assessment. So the way the special assessment process works is there's a public hearing, and all the people who are affected by that special assessment can come to that hearing and state whether or not they're in favor or not in favor of that special assessment project. And so all it takes is 51% of the people who are affected to say no, and that project is blocked. And so what we recommended and council approved is that if a street is designated for road repair and they successfully move to block the special assessment process for their ditches, that road will be dropped from the repaving schedule and a different road will be substituted in for it. And again, the reason behind that is we just didn't feel that it was appropriate to spend money on repairing a road that's not going to get the full life out of the road. As the fiduciaries for the city, it didn't seem right to be potentially wasting precious tax dollars. And so both the committee and council agreed that if that situation does arise, an alternative road will be substituted in. On the flip side of that, though, any eligible streets, so any of those 11 miles of eligible streets that proactively provides a petition to the city clerk indicating that they would be willing to approve a special assessment district for their ditches, will be given increased priority in the selection process. So the special assessment process is a pretty laborious process. So what we talked about was that if there's a street that wants to make it easier, we'll give them higher priority in the selection process. So basically meaning, I think it was Susan, noted that there were 4 miles of roads of the 11 that aren't going to get done. Well, if you agree to do the special assessment ahead of time, it's less likely that that street is going to end up in the 4 miles as opposed to the 7 miles that actually get done. So it's a way that the streets can be proactive about kind of increasing their priority. Also want to mention that streets that aren't on the streets that aren't in the 7.1 miles that get done, they can still request a special assessment process for their ditches during the 3 years of the project. And we actually have streets that are looking into doing that already. And the advantage of doing that is the fact that labor, machinery, and material will already be mobilized on site. So relative to doing a ditch project on your street, say 5 years from now, the costs are going to be significantly less because, again, all that person power, machinery, and material is already mobilized. So if it's something that your street, if you're not, like my street's not eligible, if my street wanted to consider having our ditches done, now would be a great time to talk to your neighbors and then request a special assessment for the ditches get created. So that's something you can think about even if you're not on the 7.1 miles. The infrastructure committee will recommend the special assessment districts along with the roads to city council, and again, city council will have final approval. And then the other thing I want to mention kind of similar to Susan's question earlier. This only addresses 7.1 miles of the city's ditches. We would have loved to have done all 26. We can only, at least via this proposal, afford 7. So we've got 19 miles of ditches that aren't going to get done. So what we're going to do for those 19 miles is, we have essentially newfound code enforcement resources. So we've added a lot of resources in the code enforcement area over the last year. And one of the things that we'll do is we'll use those code enforcement resources to look at the ditches in those 19 miles for, obvious and easy types of for lack of a better word, repairs. So, block culverts, debris in the ditches, leaves, tree roots, things like that, things that can be easily addressed. We haven't done that. We haven't had really code enforcement resources of any significance over the last at least 5 years, if not more. So we're going to use some of those. We would use some of those new resources to, assess those 19 miles of ditches. Now, that's not going to bring those ditches up to a condition like new, but it certainly will help the function of the ditch system and help to reduce or somewhat some of the problems that residents are having. Last thing I just want to mention, and then open it up for questions and discussion. One other advantage of this proposal is, so I don't know if people understand this, but know this. We as a city own 11 Mile Road, and we own half of Evergreen, so we're responsible for paving and maintaining those roads. So 11 Mile is going to need to be repaved probably in about 3 years. And so one of the things that, and we as a city will be on the hook for that. So one of the things that happens every year is we get from the state what's called Act 51 money, which is money for our roads. And basically what happens is the state designates that specifically for major roads like 11 Mile Road or local roads like Lathrup Boulevard, Bloomfield, and so on. And it's pretty much a 75-25 split. So 75% of that money is designated specifically for major roads, and 25% of the money is for local roads. So I talked earlier about that traditional 0.4 miles of road that we repair every year. So we take some taxpayer money, we take the 25% that's of our Act 51 money, And when we take all that money, we still don't have enough to do the 0.4 miles. And so what we do every year is there's a process where the state will allow us to transfer some of our major Act 51 money over, some of that 75% essentially, over to the local roads. And we have to do that every year still to be able to afford to do the 0.4 miles of road that we do every year. And so if we approve a project like this, we won't have to do that transfer for the next 3 years. And so what that'll mean is it allows us to essentially bank or save that major road money, all of it, that we get from the state, so that when we do get down the road 3 years and have to do 11-mile road, we've got a significant amount of money that's already saved for the road. So there's an added benefit of that by, if this project were to be approved. So that's all I have in terms of presentation. I know that there'll be a lot of questions, especially about the ditches, because it is confusing. So let me open it up for discussion. If people have questions or comments or whatever, have at it. Ian, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay. Code enforcement. So remind me what the situation is. What is code enforcement with respect to the ditch in front of my house?
So, if you ask me how the ditches got in the situation that they got in,
that's not what I'm asking. I am asking what does code require me to do?
Oh, okay.
With the ditch in front of my house, and
yeah,
if I do not do it, what form would the code enforcement take? Right.
So basically, and Scott Ringler, if you want to jump in here and help too, that's fine. So basically, what individual residents are responsible for, kind of like the right of way in front of your house. So between the sidewalk and the street, you're responsible for maintaining that area, which includes the ditches. So basically, what that means is, the water needs, the ditch needs to be, slightly graded so that the water flows, from one side of the street or from one end of the street to the next. So for example, on my street, the water flows towards Southfield Road. So, so my ditch has to be graded such that the water is flowing towards Southfield Road. The driveway culvert has to be, open and, at the right depth, so that the water flows from one side to the next. The driveway culvert can't have garbage and leaves in it. If there's a tree root that's in the ditch, the resident is responsible for that. I'm just trying to think of other things. So basically, what should have been, and this is actually, I was going to answer your question, Ian. I did understand. I was just basically going to give you a little bit of history too. But my opinion is that the reason why we're in this situation is because there never was any code enforcement. This was never enforced. We have residents in the city who just filled in their ditches, kind of under the cover of night, so to speak. And nothing was ever done. It was never noticed until it was too late, that kind of thing. And so because there was nobody, saying to residents, hey, looking at your ditch and then leaving a note on your door saying, hey, your ditch doesn't conform to code. The water, there's a lot of debris and sediment that's settled in the ditch over the years, and the water doesn't flow. You need to fix that. Contact the city. We'll help you, figure out how to do that. And then if it doesn't get done, then that's where tickets get issued and so forth. But nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever looked at the ditches. It just kind of was, they just sat there. And over time, they even, a good functioning ditch, over time, debris is going to settle, the grade is going to change. People's culverts, if we have bad winters or the driveway's cracked and water gets underneath there, they're going to heave and when they heave, then the water doesn't move from one side of the ditch to the other, so it essentially becomes a dam. So all of those things, should have and could be addressed via code enforcement and then, follow up, but it's never happened. And now we have, code enforcement resources, that we can use for that.
Okay. No,
So long-winded answer, does that answer your question?
Yeah, the reason I ask is the ditch in front of my house and the one to my right, the one closer to Southfield Road, because I'm on Sunset West, the ditch is fine. But the two adjacent houses on the other side, the driveway floods, the sidewalk floods,
Right.
and it's awful. I mean, it is as if the ditch is non-functional all the way to the corner of Sunset West and Dolores.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a big problem. Yeah, and so like I said, I mean, we can, it kind of goes back to Susan's question earlier. We would have loved to have done this all at once. I shouldn't say all at once, but over a 6-year project like we had proposed last time, so that we could get everything back to the way it should be, and then maintain it the way that it should be maintained, and we should get decades of good use out of our roads and ditches. But unfortunately, it was voted down. So we're proposing that we do 7 miles of it, and then the remaining 19 that we can't get to, we can at least try to do the easy things to help, where we can. I don't know, Scott, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you guys have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is one final thing, the house next to me is in the process, has been sold recently, and is in the process of being rehabbed extensively before it's put back on the market.
Okay.
And I suppose it's a two-part question. Well, will it require a certificate of occupancy before it can be sold? And if so, will the condition of the ditch and the culvert be part of the COO requirement?
Yeah, so the first question, I think the answer is yes. There's all sorts of inspections that'll need to be done via the building official. But I don't believe the building official looks at the ditches. I mean, that's something I can check on with Cheryl. Cheryl's on the call. Do you know if the building official does anything with that? Maybe she's stepped away. I know she's. Oh, here she is.
If the building official does anything with what? I didn't hear the first part.
Yeah. So Ian's question is the home next to his is undergoing extensive renovation before it's put up for sale, and obviously the building official will have to do inspections, to approve occupancy. Is part of that inspection, do they only look at the building, or would they actually look at the ditches to see, for example, that maybe the driveway culvert is heaved and it's not functional?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. If it's visible, I think they probably would take note of it. But I don't know for certain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can try and find that out, and Cheryl, if you can get a definitive answer and let me know. I know Ian. I can get back to Ian, or I can post it on Villagers or someplace where Ian can see it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I could add, typically they will be doing this inspection based on what permits were pulled. And that's usually the electrical, mechanical. Typically, unless they were doing driveway work and they pulled a permit for working in the easement, they probably would not look at that specifically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so if they were doing driveway work, then yeah, because I know when people do driveway work, the building official does look at the culvert. But yeah, we'll find out and let you know.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Lillian, I see you got your hand up. Let's try again. I know you tried to ask a question earlier, so. Oh wait, okay. So, Lillian says her questions are in the chat. Okay, so let me go to the chat. What funding options do we have other than a millage? Basically, nothing that's workable. I mean, we could do a special assessment similar to what we're talking about doing with the ditches. We could do it based on linear footage, but again, if we do it via linear footage, that's also done via special assessment, and the major disadvantage of the special assessment is that only people who are directly affected by the project can be assessed. So that means we exclude all the businesses. And that's a major portion of funding that we get when we do a millage. So essentially what happens is the cost skyrockets for the residents. So yeah, so the really, and you may not have been on the call when I know we talked about this a little bit earlier. I didn't see when you jumped on, but yeah, it's unfortunate because based on the tax laws and the laws in the state, there really is no other good funding mechanism other than a millage. And as Ian brought up a little bit earlier, and as we heard a lot, last year, one of the things about a millage is it's fundamentally unfair to the to the people who have been only been living in the city for a few years, but unfortunately there's no other way, which is feasible way, which is why you very rarely hear of cities doing any type of road project with anything other than a millage. Has an asphalt company been selected? No. What will happen is if this is approved, we will, in November on the 3rd, we will put together an RFP, and it will get shopped out to, basically any vendor, any contractor that's interested in doing the project, and then based upon the criteria and the costs in the RFP, all the potential vendors will be rated, and the one of those would be selected. As far as impacting the final cost, when Scott, if you want to make some comments here, feel free to chime in. But Scott, does this for a living. He's used to what asphalt is going to cost, and has baked that into the estimate, along with, as we talked about earlier, 15% contingency. That in case prices go up and so forth. Scott, anything to add?
No, you said it pretty good, Bruce. I mean, we'll put together design plans and contract documents. They'll be put out on a government website called Mitten for contractors to bid the project. Bids will be submitted to the City of Lathrup Village. You're probably going to get 3 to 5 bids because it is going to be a fairly large project. And there'll be some, your bigger asphalt contractors will be bidding this.
Okay. What would be an adequate road? Thanks, Scott. What would be an adequate road maintenance budget? I'm not sure if you are referring to for maintaining the existing roads. Or are you talking about the road projects? I'm guessing you're probably talking about the summer road projects where we're currently doing 0.4 miles of road a year. It would be great if we could, do a couple miles a year. Then in 13 years or whatever, we could get through it all. I don't know what that number would be like. I mean, one of the things that we talked. Yeah, okay. I see your comment. One of the things that we talked about, and this question came up a lot last year, where people said, well, why are we going through this big project? Why don't we just levy 4 mills or 5 mills and just do it every year with no project defined, and then just let the city. I'm sorry. Okay, I had to think about something, and then let the city just figure out, what road projects we do each summer, and we would have loved to have done that last year, and just said, all right, well, let's get 5 mills or 4 mills or whatever it is, 3 mills, and just dedicate it towards the roads. The problem with doing that is legally we can't do that because there's a law that I won't go into all the details, but basically the maximum assessed millage that our city can hit the residents with is 20 mills. And that's what our millage rate is right now. So if we just did, a millage where we were just going to raise an additional 3 or 4 mills, whatever the number was, to do maintenance, that would have had to go under a general operating millage. So that would have put our millage rate at 23 or 24 mills, which is not legal. We can't have a millage rate that's over 20. So the way to work around that is by defining a specific project and paying for it with a debt millage, a bond, because that doesn't count towards the towards the 20 mil limit that we're faced with. So we had to define some sort of project in order to be able to do this. So we did want to take a maintenance approach. In fact, one of the plans, and I'm not going to get into the details of this unless anybody really wants to, but one of the 3 proposals that we had, I said we had 3 and we only used 1, or we narrowed it down to 1. One of the ones that we didn't use basically played a shell game with that law. So what we were looking to do is do a public service millage for about 3 mills for the police and the fire department. And so that money would then be, because that doesn't count towards the 20 mil limit. And then what would happen is that money would go towards the police and fire services, and that would free up 3 mills in the general operating millage that we could then use for roads. But we kind of decided against, and then we could just do something like a yearly maintenance program where we would do 2 miles, or within the money we were proposing, we could probably do, and that millage we were talking about doing a few miles, I think maybe 3 miles of road a year or something like that. But we ultimately decided that because it was a shell game, we didn't think residents would go for it. It was very difficult to explain. People would think we're playing games with the funds and so forth. So we just really didn't think that had a chance of passing, and so we didn't go that route. And so we had to choose a project-based approach. So we can't really do just a maintenance kind of approach where we'd get enough money to do 2 to 3 miles a year. So kind of long-winded answer. Also, 1C is a better option that could yield the same results. Well, no, so when I put this slide up a little bit earlier, there are 4.4 miles that are in 1C rehabilitation. This 3.9 miles and this 1 mile, it would be a waste of money to do the 1C rehabilitation process on those roads, because those roads are too far gone. And we wouldn't get anywhere near the life that we would expect to get for the amount of money that we were paying to do that. Let's see, we got so much road. Okay. For the next several years, we are doing sidewalk repair. Why not repair the culverts with the sidewalk? I think. Well, there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, I don't think that there's really overlap between a sidewalk repair and the culvert repair. That's correct, right, Scott?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you wouldn't reap those savings. So yeah, it wouldn't make sense there. The other issue is not everybody is going to have sidewalk repair. So, you know, we have stretches, you know, of sidewalks that are in good condition. So even if we did take that approach, then, you know, those people wouldn't their sidewalks wouldn't be repaired. So if we were trying to get any type of savings, like maybe on the landscape or something like that, you know, those people wouldn't really reap those savings. If the community votes no again, what will happen to the roads? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, I trying not to think that far in advance. Just I don't know. You know, it's hard to tell whether people are weary about talking about this, and you know what if we throw another solution out. You know, I don't know what kind of solution we throw out. I mean, you know, we've kind of had what we thought was, and it was very expensive last year, but I still believe it was the right answer for the city, but residents disagreed with that, and so now we're coming back with a vastly scaled back approach. If that gets voted down, you know, I guess, you know, we try to figure out why people voted this one down. You know, was it the economy, or was it they felt that all 11 bad miles of road should be done, not just the 7? You know, we'll try to figure it out, but you know, I don't know. I don't know what the answer would be. Yeah, so. But we'll see. We'll know on November 3rd. So, I think I got all of them. Any other questions? Let me see if anybody still has their hand up. Let's see, Perry. Is there any planning for water main replacement? Yes. So right now, as you may know, I don't know where you live, Perry, but you know, Santa Barbara has been under construction. That construction that you've been seeing there over a little over a year now is water main. So we are replacing water main over this 2-year project, basically along Santa Barbara from 11 Mile up to Roseland, then Roseland up to Bloomfield, and then Bloomfield to 12 Mile. I think I got that right.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And so we're working on that, and then once that's done, you know, we have money in our capital improvement plan to continue with water main replacement. Part of your water bill, actually, I think it's about 1/3 of the water bill. I'm not sure. I don't know. Again, I don't have the numbers in front of me. That may be a little high, but a good portion of the water bill is designated towards capital improvements, and so you know, we're collecting money constantly to keep working on the water main replacement. Yes, they're working on Roseland. Will that go through to Guy Street? No, it'll go up to Bloomfield, and then Bloomfield out to 12 Mile. And the reason why, you know, for that major project, the reason why we picked that section is because by repairing that section, you know, that should improve. We would have the biggest bang for the buck for the most residents. Obviously, there are many other water mains that need to be replaced, but that one would affect the most number of people. So we chose that one first. Anything else? Let me just check the chat again, see if anybody's got their hand up. Let's see. Okay, no one's got their hand up. Check the chat one more time. Also, didn't we pave 11 Mile last year? No, we paved a small portion of 11 Mile Road, very small portion. It was a couple hundred yards from 11 Mile East, and Scott, was that on one side or both sides? I can't remember.
That was one side. Yeah, that was on the north side from 696 off ramp to Southfield.
Yeah, and so Perry, your question is Lathrup responsible for both service drives? Yes, we own 11 Mile through the village. So yeah, that's our burden, unfortunately. And as I said, one of the kind of ancillary benefits if this project gets approved is that we'll then be able to save a lot more money for that repaving, which is in the neighborhood of 1.3 million, and will be in probably about 3 years. Okay. If there's nothing else, then I appreciate you guys coming out. I keep saying coming out, connecting in, and thank you for your questions and your attention and the discussion. And we'll just vote, vote on the 3rd. So you should have all the information that you need to make a decision, and so go out and vote. And any questions, you can email me at bcantor@lathrupvillage.org. So it's BKANTOR. Happy to take any emails or calls, and have a good night. So thanks, everybody.